Well, in constructing the worksheet, the first thing I want to do is get a series of ideas that seem to be very, very closely related to this whole concept of the wind as a hobo, the wind as a traveler. And not only do I want to come up with a series of concepts, maybe 4, 5, 6 concepts that I can take to my rhyming dictionary, not only do I want to have a series of concepts, but I think it's also really useful if you pay attention as you're picking your keywords, pay attention to the vowel sounds that they include, because that's going to be the string into our rhyming dictionaries. So that for the word to be in the keyword list, it should have a different vowel sound than any of the other words in the keyword list. Otherwise, we're being redundant and trying to, go through the rhyming dictionary using the same vowel sounds, but maybe with slightly different consonant sounds. Remember that we're here dealing with a concept of hobo wind that is a little bit less stable. And so less stable rhyme types will be in play. So we'll start out right away with only keywords that have different vowel sounds. Now obviously the place to start, for me at any rate here, since I already have my central idea of hobo wind, is to deal with the long O sound of hobo and also with the short I sound of wind. So that since wind is already in the rhyming position, that is, it's the last word of the title, we'll start with wind and then probably move to hobo from there. Now, what other ideas might be relevant? Well, the hobo wind cuts a path through the world, follows a path. And so it seems to me that, after having looked up, travel, having looked up traveler and so on in the thesaurus, it seems like path might be a good place to work. Path being, a one-syllable word that could easily end up in rhyming position. So there's the short A sound. So now we have the I, we have the O, we have the A of path. And then another word, the rush of wind. And I like the word rush because rush also is both a noun, so that as a noun, I enjoy the rush, for example, and also it's as a verb, to rush into something. Now, normally, if you're using it as a verb, it can occur in the middle of a line, probably not so often in rhyming position. But when it does, it will therefore, if we find words to go with it, it can therefore form a kind of knitting of vowel sounds inside the lines. I don't want to call them internal rhymes so much as creating a sonic fabric. So I kind of like the word rush, and so there it is in our list of keywords. The word roar, the roar of the wind, seems like a nice place to go, so I added that. Note that the vowel sound in roar is the long O sound of hobo, roar. But yet, when we have R or L, but particularly R, it raises the middle of the tongue to the soft palate, and at that point changes the way the vowel sound works, so that roar and hobo really aren't that closely related. And then finally, the wind is a wanderer, and so we'll pick that up too. And so there are our keywords. And we will start using those keywords as keys, sonic keys, those vowel sounds, and we'll start exploring in the rhyming dictionary where we can go relative to those vowel sounds. All right, let's start with wind. Going to the rhyming dictionary for wind, almost everything in the rhyme column for wind is something in past tense. Grinned, sinned. And so the first thing I want to do then is say, okay, well, I don't know if I want to, this is a very present thing that I'm talking about. I'm hearing, oh, you wind, and I'm wondering where you've been. Okay, well, maybe there's a past tense there. But in the rhyming dictionary under wind, I didn't really find anything that stimulated me, that took me someplace that I found interesting with what I have to offer for this concept. And so I just decided, no, let's not deal with any of those words. You could write them down, but why? Because you're going to find a lot of words in the rhyme searches. They say, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to use this. And then of course you'll probably not use it, but you only want the ones that say, yeah, use me because here's what I can do for you. So where do we then proceed from wind? Wind. Well, one of the things that we can do is take the D of wind and look on the family rhyme table at the partner of wind, the d, d, d sound. Now we have the unvoiced plosive t, 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 int, int. And so perhaps hint might be an interesting idea because the wind hints maybe at where it's going to come from, where it's going to go. And so hint seems to be something that I might want to, I want to give the wind a hint that I want to go with it. And so perhaps hint. And so I write down hint here in my rhyme column. It's probably the most perfectly related in terms of perfect rhyme, strong family rhyme, because it contains the nasal N and then simply tags with the plosive. And so that wind, hint, really sounds like a perfect rhyme. That may be enough, by the way, not to bring it into play in this fairly unstable thing, but I like the idea of the hint that the wind gives. So the next step might be simply to drop the D sound and use the subtractive rhyme going from wind to something like spin or sin. Sin is interesting because the hobo is certainly a sinner, and perhaps this place that I'm stuck in is a place where either I feel like it's a sin for me to stay this stuck, or perhaps I want to go out and commit some. So that the whole notion of this kind of dark side that the hobo may represent, that this wandering and traveling may represent, this sort of longing for experience. So sin might be an interesting concept. And so I'll invite sin into the column and save it for later. The wind is howling outside, brushing up against my house, as it were, brushing up against the next word, the skin of my house. I want to feel it on my skin, working with sin. And so now we're still developing this idea. And this is simply the subtractive rhyme. And note, because the plosive is not a great deal of sound, that dropping it still leaves us a very, very connected rhyme, a relatively stable rhyme. Now, even in unstable sequences, there are places where you might want a really resonating rhyme, particularly if you are separating the rhymes at some distance from each other. So, working here with the subtractive rhymes seems to make some sense. Another place we could go now is using in, that is to say, dropping the plosive. We now can go into the family rhymes for n. And the closest one, of course, is the M. So we might do something like dim, looking in the rhyming dictionary. And we might even get dimmed. But the future is looking dim. The past is growing dim. So wind and dim might work. And now we're getting just a little less stable. Then I found something. Hymn. H-Y-M-N. Hymn. Singing hymns. And it sounds to me, especially in the context where I might use the word sin, that the singing of hymns, that the wind is out there singing hymns of traveling. You know, that's one of those that maybe go, yeah, I really like that idea. I really like the notion of the wind singing, which hymns brings me, the whole notion of the wind being a singer. And that maybe I want to sing along. And so moving into the family rhymes with hymn really opens things up. I never would have gotten that idea of this sort of choir, this sort of religious aspect, had I not been in my rhyming dictionary. And by the way, just FYI, have knowledge of the family rhyme table. So that even though the family rhyme table seems like a very technical thing, the results that you can find when you're using your rhyming dictionary as a brainstorming tool can be mind-blowing. And for me, this whole notion of singing, this whole notion of the wind singing and me singing along, now feels like it can create a spine throughout the song. That, hi wind, I hear you out there, and I wonder what your experiences have been in the song that you carry with you, and can I sing along? And so that seems to be something that might be a very, very interesting trail to follow in the song. And going through again, continuing through the im sounds, we get things like whim, or swim. Now swim might be interesting, swimming through the trees, but at some point we don't want to mix the metaphors. That is, if the wind is a singer, it doesn't necessarily have to be singing while it's paddling through the water. Or swimming through the trees, but I'll just in case I want to get out of this hymn thing, I'll write down swim, because of course the wind does swim across the oceans and so on, and so that's there too. Still in my family rhyme table in the nasals, note the NG sound. Now the NG sound, do it a couple of times, as in sing, that the middle of your tongue is up against your soft palate. And what that does with the short I sound, do that, What that does with the short I sound is it raises the middle of your tongue to your soft palate and turns it in almost to a long E. So that if I look up I-N-G, as in the word sing, 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 you don't get a sing, you get sing, it's almost E-N-G, sing. And so there's a transformation of the vowel sound there, but nonetheless, since we're in a context where Sing seems to be now with him a very relevant concept. Even though it's fairly unstable, which is what our song is about, we'll not write down sing. And we might write down spring. And if we want to go then even a little further away to assonance rhymes, or better yet, another way to put this is to keep the t sound and then change the nasal n to a fricative, we might get something like drift, drift, wind, drift. Note that the I sound is preserved, but yet at the same time, we're getting a fairly unstable sound. And then the least stable, of course, the consonants rhyme. Note that nd is kind of a mouthful. There's a lot of sound in the N and the D together. So let's just put down a couple of consonants rhymes. Let's put down bend, because the wind certainly will bend the trees. And of course, we don't want to use a cliche like around the bend, but certainly bend might be there. And of course, the wind is my friend. The wind is my friend. So there's the column for wind. I have there the opportunity, not only if I choose to rhyme the word wind, but I also have the possibility of planting those short I, N, or M sounds inside the verses, inside the sections of the song, in order to create a sonic fabric. And that, of course, is before I have written a single line in the song. And already the ideas are jumping. And that's the cure for writer's block. When you do this, there's none of that, oh, I just can't think of anything. It's, oh my God, there are so many possibilities. Which should, and then you're off and running.